Hey everyone, welcome to this week's episode of the Unbuild It podcast. This week we have the privilege of two outstanding sponsors in the building industry. First up, Huber Engineered Woods. They're the makers of Advantech and Zip systems. While I could sit here and give testimonials to each of their products, I'd much rather talk to you about Huber Engineered Woods as a company. As a sole proprietor, I need manufacturers that are team players. I need them at the beginning, the middle, and the end of projects to answer all my questions and help me provide the very best solutions to my clients' projects. Huber is just that team player, whether from a building science perspective or solving a sourcing question. They always have the answers I need. If you haven't used Advantech zip sheathing, zip bar sheathing, or their family of tapes and liquid flashings, there is no time like the present to team up with the pros at Huber Engineered Woods and start putting your buildings in a position for success. Second up, Benjamin Opdyke. Benjamin Opdyke is another team player that helps me solve problems. Through their team effort, we always develop solutions for placing my homes in a position for success. They offer an array of different venting and rain screen solutions to solve for my often challenging questions. Whether it's Home Slicker, Slicker Max, or the ever-tried and true Cedar Breather, their arsenal of products provide me the successful solutions I need. But the most important aspect of teaming up with a company like Benjamin Opdyke is knowing that I'm delivering long-lasting, durable solutions to my clients' projects.
Oh, that's why you were singing Christmas songs, because it's the holiday Q&A.
Unbelievable.
Can we start with that as the intro to the podcast?
The East
Welcome.
Coast time delay.
Unbelievable. Who I have to work with.
I like I actually like leaving that in. Welcome to the Unbuild It podcast. This is episode 21. This is our holiday special for 2020. And we decided that we wanted to do a holiday special as a way to say thanks to all the listeners. We started this thing in March of 2020, right? Somebody shake their
Jingle
head,
bell,
March.
jingle bell, jingle
We knew
bell
that was
rock.
coming. We've had great response from you guys, from our listeners. We're very still singing. I wonder if he knows he's singing.
And what does Q&A stand for again?
Question and answer.
Oh, got it.
We do regularly get...
That's not what they said at Paris Island.
Questions. No Marine Corps jokes during the holiday special. Okay. We regularly get questions on Instagram and through our email.
Just shut me out. That's okay. I didn't want to be part of this podcast anyway.
It's so great when they have to try to listen to both of us talking over each other at the same time.
They don't have to listen to me. I'm just ranting.
I'm about to lose my breakfast.
And so, as part of this treat, you got to hear Steve sing holiday music, but we also thought that Peter has a building science joke that he was about to tell us that we said, wait, tell us once we start the podcast. So I'm just going to put you on the spot and say, tell us an a building science.
All right, so this one's really a setup.
Just 1 second, Peter. Let me buckle into my seat so I don't fall out.
So, Steve, this joke is just for you, actually. So we just all participated in a summit where from 4 o'clock to 8 o'clock, we were in sort of non-stop presentation mode. And so my building science joke is, how does a building scientist do moisture management over a 4-hour speaking session? And the answer is, it depends.
It's much funnier if you could see how hard Peter's laughing at his own joke.
Very sorry,
Steve, I thought
everybody.
you'd know the answer. You tell me the answer to every building science question is, it depends.
I am so sorry, everybody.
And you did not get the answer.
I can sing more if you'd like.
You got to admit that's a good callback. The answer to every building science question is, it depends.
It depends.
Unbelievable.
Adult daycare products included.
So, just to preface this, I am the only one that's seen these questions, and I didn't allow my brain to even think about them. I just copied and pasted them. I edited a couple of them out, and
so this is like a mystery Q&A for Peter and I.
Yes, it is. and kind of for me because I didn't really bother putting any effort into thinking about them because I knew we were going to talk about it. So I'm going to give you first name. So I'm guessing you'll know your question if you hear your question read aloud. And then remind me, I have one on my phone that came in this morning from somebody that I also want to talk
So
about.
is this like a race to blurt out the answer, or do I have to be polite this morning?
You have
and,
to
raise
be
my
polite,
hand?
and we can answer as many or as few of these as we want.
Just trying to
and we
understand
can
the ground
spend
rules here.
as long on them as we please.
Okay.
Some of them are a yes or no. Some of them are better.
It
than that,
depends.
Yep.
There you
That's
go.
what I'm going to say to everyone.
So this question is
depends.
from Nick. I'm installing a patio door. The unit is above a rim joist resting on the floor. I understand the idea behind the flashing assembly, but does the sill flashing have to be metal? Could it be another material? Somebody want to?
It depends.
It depends. Is this? I think we just found our running joke for the episode. So my first thought was, boy, if we made them out of, if the requirement was out of metal, it might not be the worst thing in the world. But that's a really challenging assembly for most job sites, right?
Well, I say we let's run down the options that are available, and then we can talk about how we would prioritize the selection.
Nice.
Okay.
Obviously, there's metal, right? I mean, I've done a lot of copper pans, and we've seen other ones too. When we were in Texas, right, Peter? We saw aluminum ones down there
Yeah.
that they had made up. You could obviously, there's companies that make preformed plastic ones. There are ways to do a built-up one out of stretch tape. I've done those too. So,
Or liquid sealant.
And liquid sealant. So all of those, sometimes let's categorize that as general as a built-up membrane pan, if you will. The first question that I always, before I even think about that, the first question that I think of that anybody should think of, Nick, is what's the exposure of this door? Because I think that makes a little bit of a difference into how much care I put in. For example, if this is on a 2-story wall facing the ocean with no roof cover, that is totally different than a door like this that potentially opens up that has a 3-foot overhang over it and isn't coastal. It's in the cabin in the woods in Brattleboro, Vermont somewhere. See what I did there, Peter?
Very nice.
But I think those are, the 3 major choices. But I think the first question is what is our risk? So let's say we have a modest risk that there is no cover, minimal overhang, single-story house. How do we approach it? Talk to me, Peter.
So the first thing that occurred to me was a different question than you. So I'm going to obfuscate a little bit. But one of the questions I have first is, how is a windowsill flashing different than a door sill flashing? It's because we can use So if it's not different or not different enough, then all of the options that work for a window should work for a door. And so I'm going to go back and link this to Steve's thing, which is exposure. I think the exposure, particularly pre-installation of the door, is extreme, right? People are not walking through your windows during construction, but they are walking through your door rough opening. And so when Steve was talking about that project we saw down in Houston, we were elated to see that the back dam of the door sill, which was metal, was temporarily supported by a cleat so that people didn't trash the metal door sill between the installation of the door sill and the installation of the door.
You're talking about the back dam, that back edge.
I thought I said back
The
dam.
vertical leg.
Yeah, the vertical leg. Yep.
Just to be clear.
So I would say, in addition to Steve's exposure to climate, it would also be exposure to time. Like, how long do you want this door sill flashing to stand independently of the door installation?
So what you're getting at is, if you're going to make that out of a tape, you wouldn't want to put that tape down and then wait 5 months to install the door. You'd want to tape it and put the door in immediately.
Yeah, exactly. And I don't.
Whereas with metal, you might be able to get away with longer construction exposure.
Yeah, but to design it just for one-time exposure during construction, of course, is silly. So we want it. I don't think there's a compelling reason why you have to use metal for a door sill pan. I think it's the most conventional of the material choices, but I don't see an inherent reason why it has to be metal.
Well, I think the metal, I would argue the metal is probably the most durable, right? And most likely the one that wouldn't leak. Although a preformed plastic one, you could probably argue isn't going to leak.
Preformed plastic.
The other thing that plays a role too, Peter, I think is, and Jake, the weight of the door, right? If we're putting in a 6'0", 6'8" slider by Anderson, I'll throw them a plug today, right? Yeah, that window or that door assembly is what, maybe 200 and plus pounds, maybe a little bit more. But if we're putting in one of Jake's 16-foot or 14-foot lift-in slides at 800 pounds, that's a different load being implied down there for durability reasons. And could you do that out of membranes and stuff? Yeah, probably. But any little shift of that door while you're installing it, you're at the risk of ripping that membrane or whatever. And just the mere fact that it's 700 plus pounds is going to cause you to potentially do some things that, the 250-pound Anderson door, two guys can lift that up kind of very gently, put that in place and screw it off and be done.
Something else
So
that occurs. Go ahead, Jake. Sorry.
That's actually really funny that you said it exactly like that, Steve, because this was going to be one of my comments. The personal house that I'm building for myself, I had a conversation with my carpenters when we were installing two different 14-foot wide lift-and slides. And one of them said, wouldn't you rather bend this out of brake metal than do it with the liquid flash like we're doing? And I said, well, I have the liquid flash. I don't have the metal brake or the metal here. And the liquid flash will work, and it makes making those air barrier connections very easy.
Yeah.
And he very astutely said, but this thing weighs a ton. Isn't it going to tear into that at all? And if it tears into it, don't we have a big problem? And I said, well, we do have a problem, possibly. And it's too big for us to shift around once we get it in there. So we're going to set it in there, and we're not going to move it. And both these doors are under a 5-foot overhang. We're not worried about it. So we just covered absolutely everything in that one conversation that I had with Jacob Norris about exposure and what the load is and what we need the membrane to do. And I think when we bring up that idea of metal, the only reason we don't traditionally use metal on our projects is because that sill also has an air barrier connection aspect to it.
I was just thinking if you slide the door in, that sort of lobbies for it to be metal, I guess, as opposed to a membrane. And the other thing I was thinking is, I don't know what AMA 711, which is the standard. I think
that's where I get my coffee.
I thought of the same joke. Good for you, Steve.
I don't.
Peter, since we've never talked about it, real quick, explain what AMA is before you just go into this.
Oh, it's the Architectural Association.
70s band from Australia. Was that
Austria?
Austria.
I'm glad you interrupted me because I'm not sure I have the acronym right, but it's like
I told you I'm in a real crappy mood today, so don't mess with me.
It's an industry organization that deals mostly with fenestration.
Yes, and I don't know if the 711, which is the standard for installation, applies to both windows and doors. So I might be talking out of turn here, but I would look at what the industry standard is for pan flashings, and then also look at the manufacturer install requirements or directions. Maybe they have standards that they say, hey, yeah, we don't want you to use anything but metal. Do you guys know whether that's true?
I
know that we don't pay
know
attention
that is true.
to the American manufacturers' installation methods for the most part because we don't agree with them because we find them to be poor quality.
Ooh. Well, that's a whole nother topic.
Yes, it
Wow.
is, and we can.
But-
we can.
I was just going to say, Peter, we have had a conversation about what I'm about to ask you that's relative to this, but it'd be great to get Jake's perspective and for everybody to hear your perspective, Peter. I've shown, those metal pans. I've made them out of copper, and then I've done posts on Instagram. You can find me there, Stephen Basic Architect, by the way. But people have said, "Oh my God, you can't do that. That's a huge thermal break, and you're going to get all kinds of condensation on the inside against your hardwood floor because it's going to be freezing." And we've had this conversation, so have at it, Peter. How did we talk about it?
I thought you were gonna let Jake go first.
Well, go ahead. We'll let Jake go, and then you can correct him.
Well, what are we chasing? Like, how many of those little bitty things can we chase in an assembly before we're wasting time?
To me, it's like, saying, "Oh, you're going gray. You got to get your hair dyed," and you have one gray hair on your head.
Yeah.
Well,
what was your conversation about it? Peter's not going to comment now that we talked about gray hair.
Given that analogy, I don't want to touch it. But frankly, speaking of gray hair, I have no recollection of having a conversation with Steve about this.
Oh my God.
But I will say that the thermal bridge accomplished by a piece of sheet metal is probably no different than the thermal bridge created by the structural sill of the unit. Right? I mean, it
Or
already
less,
is.
because that sheet metal's even thinner.
Yeah. So
it's
right.
more conductive, but the cross-sectional area. Yeah, that was actually your answer, is that I'm going to refresh your memory. So this is just, I'm sorry, but this is substantiated evidence that you're losing it. Because you just admitted to not remembering the conversation we had. So that's okay. That's okay.
Well, there may be other reasons, Steve, in play as to why I don't remember conversations.
But you did. You said
just
you basically
blocking.
wrote it off as, you to quote you, actually, you said, "I just can't see how a piece of sheet metal can cause that much of a problem."
So, but the other thing I have about the installation is how important it is to install strategically placed wedges so that the sill of the unit is separated by a small space from the sill pan flashing. That to me seems like really, really important, because otherwise that back dam is not going to drain.
It can't drain.
It can't drain because
When you say wedges, and I'm just being clear.
Shims, sorry.
These shims are blocking, because wedges. When you say wedges, to me, it's like, okay, why are we putting this little triangular thing in there? Isn't the door going to then go out of plumb? Or
No, you could slope your sill and then put in.
You
wedges.
know what we've used a lot, honestly. We've just taken
No, tell me.
Okay.
Tell me.
Advantech blocks. We've used Advantech blocks. I've had evidence of Advantech being fully submerged in water and not really being a problem. And there's no water there. And the beauty of an Advantech block is you can cut the block proportionally to the weight of the window and size of the window, right? So if I go and buy plastic shims and I'm using a European window that's 4 1/8 and the shim is 3 inches, well, I don't get that full bearing at the bottom.
Yeah.
But if I use a piece of Advantech or something, or piece of dense PVC, which it's not going to crush at 1/2 inch thickness or whatever.
But that means if you create that free draining space, then doing the continuous air barrier across the back dam becomes really,
well, that
really
just
important.
gets back to your original question. If I treat it like a window, the air sealing on the window frame moves to the inside of the door, not the outside face.
But I get this question a lot. How the hell do you keep it continuous if you have an open, free draining sill pan?
Yeah. And I mean, this just goes back to the best way to keep the window or door from leaking is don't let it see water.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Keep water off the damn door. If you put a door in a wall, put protection with the door. It's kind of like the screen door comes with the outside door, a roof should too.
Yeah, I'm dealing with a project right now that it seems like half the roof load has been directed right to a patio door. Like, please replace me every 3 years should be etched across the glass of the patio door.
I think it was like 2 or 3 years ago, I was starting a small remodeling project, and we weren't working on this, but we were there to show up and have a meeting. The entry door to get into their house on the side was like right below a valley that didn't have gutters, and it was pouring out that day. And it's literally, we had to go around the house to go in it because we couldn't go in the door. There was so much water coming down the valley.
It's
And
their
this
way of
wasn't one of your
discouraging
designs?
visitors. Like, we don't
No.
want any visitors. Oh, well, we'll design it this way then.
Yeah, it was definitely a deterrent. That's for sure.
Okay, so
So we spent like 15 minutes on question number 1, right?
yeah,
Actually,
did.
19 minutes, 31 seconds,
there was some
0.657
singing in there at the
counting.
beginning. I think that this actually leads into the question that I got this morning really well. This comes from Travis. In my desire to use Zip-R for convenience, I sometimes forget about the 20% estimated shrinkage and the R value loss in polyiso over the first 20 years. How do you resolve this concern at the seams, or am I quoting bad science?
Ooh.
It depends.
It depends. but that's like saying, first of all, I would compare that to if I'm using, like board sheathing of old days. That had to have shrunk up immensely when they nailed it up versus 10 years later. But obviously they didn't have all the attachments to it that Zip-R. The first question I'd have is for Master Peter. Does Atlas Insulation really, because they're the ones that provide the polyiso for Zip, right?
I think, yes.
It is now.
Yes.
Are we allowed
Does
to
it
say that?
really shrink up that much?
Yeah, so I was wondering if this was related to the blowing agent replacement. In other words, whatever the blowing agent is in the bubbles,
Off
that
gases, basically.
it basically diffuses out at some rate. But polyiso, the blowing agent, I believe, is pentane, and most of that or all of that is evacuated as part of the blowing process. And I'm really stretching my knowledge of polyiso manufacturing here, but that shrinkage rate seems pretty high to me, but I honestly do not know.
So I don't know what the exact number is for the shrinkage rate, but I remember having a conversation with Danko at Huber, their building scientist, and it was substantially lower than 20%, if my memory serves me. So I think the question starts with maybe a false premise that there is 20% shrinkage. Now, that doesn't change the idea that there is shrinkage and loss there.
Is that 20%? Is that described as in all directions or in thickness?
I think it's all directions because it's the total body of the polyiso because it's spread throughout.
Well, it definitely can't. If it's a 4-foot wide panel, it's not shrinking 20% in width.
No.
It's like maybe 0.02%.
And I think that it's a loss in R value as much as anything else. But the question addresses what happens at your seams. And so this question, I went back and forth with him this morning, and he said, you could put sealant between the seams as you put the panels together. You could put tape on the interior face too. And the long and short of it was you're chasing minuscule stuff. If you're doing a good job air sealing and you're building at least a 2x6 wall and you're putting Zip-R on the outside, at least in my climate zone, you're chasing a minor thing, in my opinion.
Yeah, and this whole issue of three-dimensional air leakage networks where you have really tiny cracks that communicate, they're, as far as I know, they're way more of an issue in roof assemblies than they are in wall assemblies because of the nature of warm moist air rising. But this goes straight to the heart of making sure that the panel joints are managed with a material that can take contraction and expansion, right? So we've learned with structurally insulated panels that if you try to just use some sort of adhesive or glue type foam material between butt panel joints. And when those panel joints move, they break that bond. And so using a pressure sensitive adhesive tape across the panels allows those panels to move back and forth and create that small, hairline crack without it resulting in a convective airflow. So yes, there's a loss in R value because of that overall shrinkage, but I think that that's dwarfed by the importance of it not resulting in an air leak.
That's basically where we got this morning, too. That if you're building a well-managed assembly and you're not skimping everywhere else on insulation, that little shift, whatever it is, doesn't matter. You're chasing pennies. Okay, that was an easy
Wow,
one.
we did that one way faster than the...
Well, we're getting better at this.
But yeah,
This
by
one
the
comes
last
from-
one, it'll just be yes, no.
Then I have one that I'll say for the yes or no. This one comes from Dave. Love the podcast. Thanks so much. We are installing LP SmartSide board and batten over hydro gap over taped and rolled zip wall. Do I need to tape the hydro gap seams, or is it just good enough to staple it up? Thanks. Have a great day. So I think we have to talk about what things are doing what jobs, right?
Yeah.
Because his zip R is his weather resistant barrier once he's, taped and rolled. After that, the hydro gap, you get some weather resistant barrier out of it, but the goal of putting that on, I would assume, is the gap.
Yeah, but I got to test your knowledge, Peter, because I think there is an it might be AMA report, but something that says it's something along the lines of building papers that are not taped or sealed. There's a minimum of, for some reason, 9 inches comes to mind, overlap. Does that ring a bell?
I know that Tyvek's standard and I think the hydrogap standard both is a 6 inches on the horizontal and a foot on the horizontal and 6 inches on the vertical.
That's really interesting because, Steve, I remember the 9 inches as sort of the limit to which water will travel, horizontally.
Laterally.
Laterally, when we have an overlap. I don't know why I remember that number. I think it was because of research that was being done at BSC on a test hut.
Well, Nathan and I, when we were testing the window flashings and that, I remember we were out in Vegas, we had some time, and we said, hey, let's see if we can install a window with just felt paper and no tape and flash it properly. And I remember one of the flashing guys that was with us said, make sure that everything laps a minimum of 9 inches because that's the blah, 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 blah requirement, something. And 9 inches stuck in my head. And lo and behold, we did it. And water got into the system, but it never leaked. Right? So there's some definite truth to that. So getting back to the question, so we don't turn this into a 2-hour question. My take is if you're going to tape it, then yeah, you can go with like a 4-inch lap or whatever. But if you're looking to not tape it, I would say do a 12-inch lap on it and call it a day.
I think the biggest chance for a mistake is, as Jake identified, which layer is doing what. So I presume you're taping the zip as your air barrier, but you're using the hydrogap as your water control layer or WRB, right? So therefore you want to connect your flashings at penetrations to the WRB, not to what the air barrier is. Now, this gets a little confusing because what if you say, well, no, I'm not really using the hydrogap as my WRB, I'm just using it as a drain space. That to me would be a very big mistake. That if you're going to put up a weather resistant barrier product and it's simply like putting up a furring strip, right? I don't think you want water to sit between the backside of your hydrogap and the exterior face of the zip panel. This is one of the big issues for me on job sites is people who lose track of
what's doing what.
What's doing what? Yeah. And I'll tell you, the most egregious example for me was we used to routinely treat J channel on vinyl siding as a drainage system, right? And
It's a gutter.
Thinking back on it, it's like, oh my God, how could we have been so stupid? But it was, assigning the wrong responsibility to the wrong material.
Well, what's interesting, guys, is on this big house that I'm doing right now, it's a similar situation with totally different materials. So in this wall, we have our wood frame. We sheathed it with Advantech. We used Sega's MyVest 500 SA, their self-adhered weather barrier. And that is what I call the Alamo. That's our water management layer. That's where we protect everything, and that's how I acknowledged it. Now, on top of that, we put 2 inches of EPS and then wood 1x4 strapping and then boral siding. So the question came up, do we treat the joints of the EPS? Which is pretty much, in this case, it's just a 2-inch thick hydro gap, right? It's pretty much the same idea if we're treating the zip and the Advantech with the MyVest and an analogous. But anyways, my answer was no. My answer was leave it open. And for 2 reasons. One, I asked the question of, if I put tape on there, what am I sealing in? Which I think is far more dangerous than what I'm sealing out. And I don't know if you were around at Building Science, but we did a project. I remember going out there with Joe, Libertyville, Illinois, with Town and Country Homes. Who's the heavy set bearded fellow out there that was in charge?
I'm not going to.
He was a cool
Every
dude.
builder in Illinois heavy set and bearded.
Oh, you're going to hear about that, Jake.
He was a pretty cool dude.
Yeah, I know who you're talking about. I can't remember.
Yeah. But anyways, we did a house out there that was sheathed in XPS. The horizontal joints were treated with a small, 12-inch piece of poly. All the vertical joints were left open and not taped. And we tested it, and it didn't leak.
So you put in a Z flashing of polyethylene at horizontal joints. I remember
the vertical,
when we were doing, yeah.
But the vertical joints, the
left
water
open.
found the edge and fell to gravity.
Yep.
It didn't go in the joint.
Yeah.
Now, that might be a little different when the house is built and there's a pressure difference across the wall. But in terms of my EPS wall, I thought of it the same way. Keep that joint open so it can drain and dry. But if anything does get in that rain screen, it's going to find that edge of the EPS and want to travel vertically and not travel laterally. And if it does, what do I care?
Yeah.
That teaspoon of water that gets in there is, I have the Alamo in the Sega MyVest against the Advantech.
Well, this gets back to, if you've got the dedicated air control layer to the interior of that, the question is, as you pose it, Steve, what am I taping to accomplish? Am I taping to accomplish, control of water or control of air? Because they're 2 really different things in terms of, best practice.
But I've seen those details where, and actually a builder sent me one yesterday that was, I looked at it and said, this thing is about 5 times as complicated as it needs to be. This is an architect going for detail of the year and not really thinking about what they're doing. But a lot of people would be inclined to want to tape that EPS and say, oh, we'll seal that up and I'll get a nice drainage plane and stuff there. But in my eyes, a drainage plane doesn't necessarily have to be hermetically sealed, if that makes sense.
So another question that comes up for this, what's going to accomplish what, is when you put up window cap and you're trying to link it to the, so this is at the head of a window and you've got furring strips and you're trying to figure out, well, wait a minute, do I put the window cap on before the furring strips and then I have to buy a different dimension of window cap because now it's dragging it across? And then when I put up the trim around the window, do I put up a second window cap?
Yes.
So Did I just pose a question or?
And I answered it. I said
He
yes.
said, I think he meant to say it depends. That's what he
No, I
meant to
didn't.
say.
No, on this one it doesn't depend. I always put 2.
Yep.
I flashed the window
Nice.
to my water management layer, which in let's say it's zip. I would flash the window to the zip, and then I would flash my siding with a little cap on top of the rain screen. And that piece is to just take whatever bulk water is running down the siding and kick it off the face of the window.
So your drop dead is connecting the window cap weather lapped to your drainage plane, but the secondary one is essentially to protect, the 90% and to keep your cladding dry.
Yeah. I think a good way to look at it, that I always look at it, is even with air barriers and water management, I have what I call the Alamo, right? This is the last chance.
Yeah.
This is the fortification of my system. And then with that, it's okay to have additional pieces of flashing or whatever to kick it out. You just want to make sure that those pieces of flashing or tape don't inhibit drying if it gets in.
Yeah, well said.
And that window head flashing that we were just talking about, same thing goes in my book for a window that's installed in a protruding buck. So if we have exterior insulation and say we put a 2x4 around the opening to mount the window to bring it out to the face of the insulation, same thing goes. It still goes all the way back to whatever that water management layer is.
Mm-hmm.
And that's another good point with that exterior insulation. We're leaving that horizontal joint above the window open so that it can drain, even if we're taping everything else.
Yeah.
So, okay, this is probably my favorite one, and it's because of the way that David wrote the question.
Is this the one about pigeons?
No.
That's an inside joke,
guys.
everybody.
That's just
not appropriate for the podcast. We're going to pretend to be G-rated here.
Your comment is absurd. Oh, I mean absurd.
David said, simple question. Which wall? 2x4 with zip R6 and Rockwool R15 bat, or 2x6 with standard zip and Rockwool R23 bat? He's in climate zone 3A. The building code is R13 bat and requires 16-inch on-center framing, or actually the IRC for 2018 says R20 or 13 plus 5.
Yes.
I love the fact that he said simple question.
Yes.
Which wall? I think that this was the best one to say that it depends, right?
Actually, it doesn't depend for me.
You're going to say exterior insulation always?
I'm going to go with exterior insulation all day. I put my money on that all the time. In the spirit of Gus Handegord, put as much insulation on the outside of the frame as you can, and you can never go wrong. I will never forget him telling me that.
What about cost?
Well, he didn't have cost as an implication.
Well, he just said which wall.
Yeah, I
we
think
get
that's
to apply whatever we want to it.
That's the heart of the question, which is what? Most buildable, cheapest, highest performing,
you
most
can't
durable?
go and ask all these clarifiers
Stuff
after I
you can
answer
get at
the
the
question.
local hardware store, or something that you're going to have to order.
And we didn't even.
I'm with Steve.
All that stuff is
it's
readily
my
available,
choice-
so that's not a question.
Well, that's
And-
your market.
I would say it also depends on the type of cladding, because that much thicker Rockwool on the outside is going to bring up all kinds of issues with the structural attachment of the furring strip to the framing.
It's not Rockwool on the outside. It was Zip R6 versus Zip.
He was changing the cavity insulation from R15 to R23. That was it. So it is just a question of Zip R or not Zip R, basically.
I mean, when you think about it from an R value, any fluffy insulation is 3 and change, right? So going from a 2x6 to a 2x4 is a reduction of R6-ish. And what's the continuation of the insulation is R6. But you gain the 15 to 20% of opaque area in the framing on the structure. So the R6 is clearly a winner.
So even though the code allows you to take the approach of reduced cavity with continuous exterior and sort of make it an R value equivalency, it's not, because continuous on the outside trumps, right?
Yeah, the
Yep.
continuous on the outside, I would
Yeah, it's
state
worth
it as
more.
it ups the whole wall R value,
Totally agree.
not the insulation R value.
Yep.
And it puts you at a lower risk, right?
does.
Because every
You're
one of the
raising that.
studs in that frame now are at a warmer temperature.
You know, interesting
Pushing
too.
that condensation zone further out.
Yes.
And it also takes the sheathing, which in a 3A, right? So that's
Yep.
not warm humid.
South
that's
of me.
That's hot humid.
Yep.
So most of the vapor pressure experiences are from the outside. So having a material like zip on the exterior of an assembly is not a bad thing.
Okay. Here was kind of an existential one. This was for Ryan.
I do believe in
This
aliens.
was from Ryan. If you could choose to
Being
be a
one
builder,
yourself, you believe in aliens?
The mothership will come and get me soon. It's we're on schedule.
is this a Heaven's Gate reference? What are we?
No, I'm not taking anybody with me. I'm going
Okay.
by myself. I'm
This-
going solo.
This was from Ryan. If you could be a builder in any climate zone, what climate zone would you choose based on building science?
Oh, that's an excellent question. Very nice. I really, it's a silly question though, right? Because you just pick Hawaii.
Yeah.
I mean, for
Yeah.
for totally non-building reasons.
It said
Well,
his
I-
question did
so
say
honestly
based on
though,
building
Peter,
science.
Oh shoot.
I-
Okay, but
I-
still,
I
I
think
still
I-
pick that one.
I still got a better answer.
It
I
depends.
think I would say I think I would say San Diego, because it gives me the best building climate. But if I scan the country and think about the lowest risk of anything, San Diego area kind of comes
Yeah.
to mind, or Tucson maybe. The only thing about Tucson is it gets hotter in the summer to be a builder there and a little more uncomfortable. But I think San Diego is probably, I can't think. Can you think of a place?
You're
in
wrong.
The,
By the way,
Huh?
it's not San Diego. You're both wrong.
So, I think the
Fine.
oldest buildings in the world are located in a Mediterranean climate, where it's very, very mild, but 6 months of drying and 6 months of wetting. So I think I got to go with history on this and pick the climate zone 3C, which is equivalent in U.S. standards. Are you still awake, Steve, as I go through this
Jesus.
answer?
can
I'm
you
gonna
give
say
me? Can you
climate
give me a
zone-
street address in a county?
3C. 3C, that's what I say.
Okay,
But
so
put
I'm
that
gonna-
in terms that we understand, for God's sakes. Give me a city.
San Francisco.
Okay.
I'm going to say where I build currently, because I don't have extremes that I have to deal with, and I don't have extremes for risk. We get cold,
Listen,
we get hot, we get
You have to truck
heating,
zip
we get
in
cooling.
1,000 miles.
I still am going to tell you that I think right here where I don't have to deal with, hard freeze and standing
Salesman
snow,
at the
I
lumberyard
don't have
still
to-
questions what plywood is.
I don't have to deal with extreme humidity for 6 months out of the year. I don't have to deal with coastal. And as much as I complain about it,
Is this how
the
people
building
from
inspectors are
Columbia
pretty
convince themselves they're the center of the universe?
ha, it doesn't have to be Columbia.
That it's
I'm
a
talking
great
about my
place.
climate zone.
Okay.
That's all.
Notice
It
the
is the center of
population
the
there,
universe.
Peter, is what, like 500,000?
Well, yeah, but that's the same as the whole state of Vermont, so we can't go there.
Yeah, that's true. That's
I think this is cool that we all three came up with a different answer. And I like all of them. I mean, I don't like you guys, but I like your answers.
Wow. Okay. That was the most fun question. We get back to some other stuff here. We did have twice now. I've had the same conversation on one of the podcasts. You guys talked about being able to fill out a form for the appraisers to understand energy efficient details on the home. What was that form called? And I opened
Addendum
it.
1004.
yes.
So it's AI report form 820.06. It's the residential green and energy efficiency addendum.
Wow.
And I brought it up because
Better
we used
known
to run
as
a
the
recent-
parsonage report.
The Parsonage Report sounds like your local Catholic church's Sunday morning radio program talking about the news and telling you who to vote for. Sister Sarah fell down the stairs this week and broke her ankle. We're asking for prayers to keep Sister Sarah in your heart. That sort of thing. Welcome to the Parsonage Report.
Very good, Jake.
That was so scary because it was so good.
Well, he sort of confused Catholicism and Lutheranism, but that's okay.
Aren't they all confused? Actually, I will, and you guys are going to cringe when I preface this, but I'm going to tell you my my favorite religious joke since we're telling jokes.
Oh,
and it's
nice.
that time of year.
I was just going to drop one, but I'm not quite sure it's ready for prime time.
It's Religions of the World Day in elementary school, and all the kids are asked to bring something in that represents their religion. And the first kid stands up and says, I'm Catholic, so I brought a rosary. This is something that we use in our prayer process. And the next kid stands up and he says, I'm Jewish, and I brought the Star of David. It's representative of a lot of different things in our religion. And the third kid stands up and says, I'm a Methodist. I brought a casserole. I love the fact that Peter's rolling around in his chair and Steve's rolling his eyes. There's not a general consensus on that joke. Okay. Okay, so this will be our last question for today, and this one's a little on the long side, so bear with me while I read it. I think that there's good information in the way he asked his question.
Cool.
There's a new home project for a friend of mine. This is from Ryan, another Ryan as well.
Oh, a speaking for a friend question.
Yeah. There's a new home project for a friend of mine that will be on a very rocky piece of land. The first home I built was in Montana, and we used a frost-protected slab foundation with turned-down footings due to the same issue with digging in a basement being out of cost range. It saved a fortune, and there really can be a very cost-effective way to build in the Midwest. Ryan's in the Midwest as well as I. We protected the EPS above ground with aluminum flashing and a 36-inch gravel ring all the way around the house. You guys have talked recently about not liking exterior insulation on a basement due to pests, etc. For a budget project with lots of rocks, how would you design a foundation? The frost elevation is 36 inches below grade. Do I bite the bullet and dig frost walls? Is a frost-protected foundation viable with the graphite? There's a lot to this one, by the way. With the graphite EPS that Jake talked about in a Build Show Network video, is perfect block, like Steve's been plugging the right thing, and we backfill with gravel. And then he goes on to ask a question about my personal house. That's just so you know, Ryan, that question was a mistake at my personal house. That's what that video was about. So the question is, very rocky soil. Is it better to do a floating raft on top of the ground, basically, or are we looking more towards putting that insulation back on the outside like he's done before?
So
I have an alternative.
And Jake, is the basic comparison the floating raft compared to shallow frost-free?
That was the way I took it, yeah.
Okay, yeah. Well, the floating raft idea to me is a new innovation. You know, and I attribute this to some degree, if not totally, to Steve's approach. But I would say that we just got to make sure that I like the floating raft a lot because it avoids all of the issues of any other system, including shallow frost-free. But we got to make sure that insulation stays viable. And so I would say that either the graphite or Atlas has a EPA-approved termiticide injected or fused insulation. It used to be called Thermal Star, I think, and it was orange, and it was a 25 psi EPS. I think it's now being manufactured as just plain white EPS, but it has that termiticide infused into the product. Yeah, so got to protect that that raft, right, Steve?
Yeah, this is a tough one because I'm just going to go back to the rocky ground thing. With my structural engineer, we've had a number of projects that were rock, and the first hurdle is the rock substantial enough where the whole house is on rock, or is it partially on rock? Because my structural engineer, in conversations, he hates any type of hybrid. It's either we pin to rock completely, or we hammer out all the rock we need to hammer out and put in an independent foundation.
And
He
so
said you
because
can't.
I know where this builder is, because he asked this question through Instagram, and he is in rocky soil, not ledge. He is in limestone chunks everywhere, flint, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, then I would dig it out, put in a frost wall, and do the raft approach. I love that detail. You're not going to get me to
And
veer
from a cost
much from it.
standpoint, any building a house is going to be expensive. So I hate when we have that conversation based off.
Yeah,
of cost.
I hate the whole how much is that going to cost? Because what's the cost of doing it right is the question.
Yeah, and I particularly object to questions that retain the cost of foundations. Like, we can have conversations about other things, but holy crap, if there's one place you want to put your money, it's the foundation. It literally is the foundation of the building. That kind of, there's inherent a message there.
Well, Peter puts his foot down on foundations.
Oh, I like that, foot down on foundations.
Thank you for listening to the Parsonage Report.
Jake, your microphone's not on.
Sorry,
that's
I was
a good
coughing,
thing.
so I muted it. That was our Q&A episode, but I think that we wanted to say thank you guys for listening to, we'll call it year 1 of the Unbuild It podcast.
Absolutely.
Another thing that I thought of the other day, I'm from the Midwest, so I use the term guys not to mean men. I mean men and women. I mean everyone. And I forget sometimes that some people might not know that that's what I'm doing. So I feel like I have to explain that sometimes.
I can't tell you how many times I'll send like Peter and not this Peter, but let's say Jim and Sue send me an email, clients, and I'll say, "Hey guys," and it's like, "Whoa, wait a minute, is she going to take that the wrong way?"
Yeah.
I mean, it's
a weird language thing that happens with me. Is there anything that you guys would like to talk about before we wrap up the year?
Yes, I would.
Okay.
I would like, and I'm going to be totally sincere here for a minute. So grab a Kleenex, Peter.
I don't believe it.
No, I am. It's the holiday season, Jacob. Please be respectful.
Oh boy.
No, I'd just like to say, hey, thanks to all of our listeners. It's a couple things, and thank you to Jake and Peter. A couple things. One, when we started this, I thought it would be fun, but I had no idea it would be as fun as it is.
Here.
As I travel and go around, I meet people that just totally appreciate what we're doing here. They enjoy the podcast. I get messages on Instagram and emails all the time. People loving what we're doing, and we're having a blast. And it's I say that thank you in a community way, that together we can make a difference. And I'm very proud to be part of it. And it's a privilege to share this with you all. So thank you. And I look forward to even a better year next year.
So that's a good segue, because I would like to pre-apologize for our behavior in 2021, because we're definitely going to offend somebody.
Oh, yeah. I'm bringing out pigeon jokes.
Happy New Year.
I want to say thank you to our listeners, but I also want to say thank you to our sponsors. Without the sponsors and their support, we really couldn't do this. It is a small pirate ship, but the funding that our sponsors have given us to be able to do this, make this pirate ship float.
Here.
And we're really happy to have everybody involved. And I think we have some really great things coming up for the next year too. We have some of those podcasts already recorded. We have great guests, and we have a list of topics that really expand upon where we've been already and places that we haven't talked about yet. So I think we have some exciting stuff coming. And maybe at some point we'll get to travel and do podcasts in person again.
There you go.
Yeah. Great point about the sponsors, Jake, because we all know a lot of our sponsors firsthand, and me personally, their heart is in the education. They're part of the community and the team here to make sure that we're all getting and sharing the best knowledge that we can. So,
And,
great point,
and they
Jake.
pretty much give us free reign, sometimes whether they like it or not.
Well, not only do they give us free reign, but they don't give us restriction either, which I think is highly respectful, right? Like, hey, you guys go do your thing, and you talk about what you want to talk about the way you want to talk about it, which is, I think, even more commendable than just being a sponsor.
Okay, I'm sure we'll have another one of these Q&A episodes in 2021, so don't hesitate to send questions.
Uh,
I'm just going to start sending in questions under obscure email names now.
I have a friend who...
We could have just made them up if we wanted to. So it's questions at the Unbuild It podcast. We do have one other request. We would really love it if you subscribe to the podcast as well and not just download the podcast. It gives us a better insight as to how many people are following along that are regulars versus how many in and out listeners. And please, please, please go to iTunes and leave us a 5-star review. If you don't think it's a 5-star podcast, sit on your hands and don't type a review. Until next year, for the Unbuild It podcast this year, I'm Jake Bruton.
I'm Peter Yost.
And I'm Steve Bazek with the Parsonage Report.
Thanks, you guys.
Later.